My people, the political atmosphere in Zimbabwe is becoming hotter by the day, and what is happening right now inside ZANU PF is no longer ordinary politics. This thing has now turned into a full power struggle that many people believe could decide the future of the country for years to come. The biggest topic shaking Zimbabwe today is the famous 2030 agenda, the political plan linked to extending President Emmerson Mnangagwa's leadership beyond 2028. Reports, political insiders, and growing tension inside the ruling party now suggest that powerful people around Vice President Constantino Chiwenga are no longer comfortable with the direction things are going. And honestly, if you look carefully at the body language, the speeches, the cabinet reshuffles, the military movements, and the comments coming from senior party figures, you can clearly see that Zimbabwe politics has entered another serious phase. Now, for people outside Zimbabwe who may not fully understand how deep this story is, let us first go back a little. Remember, President Mnangagwa came into power in 2017 after the dramatic removal of former President Robert Mugabe. That moment changed Zimbabwe completely. And one of the key figures behind that transition was none other than Constantino Chiwenga, who at that time was the commander of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces. Many people believe Chiwenga played one of the biggest roles in making sure Mnangagwa entered State House successfully after Mugabe's exit. That is why many Zimbabweans always believed there was some form of understanding inside the ruling party that after Mnangagwa's second term, power would eventually move toward Chiwenga. But now, the political calculations appear to be changing. The so-called 2030 agenda is creating major tension because many people inside the ruling party believe the project is no longer just about development of Vision 2030. Critics say it is slowly becoming a political tool to extend Mnangagwa's stay in power. And once succession politics starts mixing with constitutional changes, that is when African politics usually becomes very complicated. Very complicated. Recently, Zimbabwe's cabinet reportedly approved constitutional proposals that could extend presidential terms and change how future leaders are elected. According to reports, some proposals could allow the president to stay in office until 2030, instead of stepping down in 2028 as originally expected under the current constitution. Now, my people, immediately after those reports started spreading, the political temperature inside the country began rising because many Zimbabweans started asking one serious question. If Mnangagwa stays until 2030, what happens to Chiwenga's political future? And that is where this entire drama becomes extremely interesting. Because inside ZANU PF, there are now whispers of growing divisions. Some are loyal to Mnangagwa. Others are believed to support Chiwenga quietly. And when powerful ruling parties begin developing internal camps, every statement suddenly becomes important. Every movement becomes political. Every reshuffle becomes suspicious. Even silence becomes meaningful. Now let us talk about Lieutenant General Anselem Sanyatwe because his name is now appearing heavily in these political conversations. Sanyatwe has long been viewed as someone connected to military structures and security circles that are influential inside Zimbabwe politics. Then suddenly, changes started happening around military leadership, and observers immediately began connecting those developments to the growing succession debate. Many analysts believe Mnangagwa has been carefully restructuring important institutions ahead of future political battles. Others believe the moves are simply normal government adjustments. But in Zimbabwe politics, people rarely see such movements as ordinary, especially during succession season. And remember, Zimbabwe's military has historically played a major role in political transitions. So once military-linked names begin appearing in political discussions, citizens immediately pay attention. Now, another figure making headlines is Christopher Mutsvangwa. This man has become one of the loudest voices defending the 2030 project publicly. Recently, Mutsvangwa openly told factions inside ZANU PF who have presidential ambitions to wait until after 2030. That statement immediately caused political debate because many people interpreted it as a direct message to Chiwenga's camp. And honestly, the wording itself was enough to raise eyebrows across Zimbabwe. Imagine telling ambitious politicians inside a ruling party to relax and wait until 2030. That statement alone shows how tense the succession conversation has become. At the same time, reports also suggest that Chiwenga himself has not fully embraced the 2030 campaign publicly, the way some Mnangagwa loyalists have done. And in politics, silence can sometimes speak louder than shouting. Because when everybody is chanting slogans loudly, and one powerful figure remains careful and measured, people naturally begin reading deeper meanings into that silence. Now, what makes this story even more dramatic is the growing discussion around businessman Kudakwashe Tagwirei. This businessman is now becoming one of the most talked about figures in Zimbabwean politics. Reports and political speculation suggest Tagwirei's influence inside ZANU PF has grown significantly in recent years. Some people even believe there are powerful forces trying to position him for a bigger future political role. And once businessmen begin entering succession conversations in African politics, things become even more unpredictable because politics then becomes connected to business interests, contracts, influence networks, and financial power. Now imagine all these things happening while ordinary Zimbabweans are already struggling with economic pressure, high cost of living, unemployment concerns, and frustration over the economy. That combination creates tension across the country because while politicians are busy fighting over succession, many citizens are simply hoping for better living conditions. Some people want stable prices. Some want better salaries. Some want investment opportunities. Some just want political calmness. But instead, Zimbabwe is now facing one of the biggest internal political battles since the Mugabe era ended. And honestly, many people are beginning to compare the current atmosphere to the period before Mugabe eventually left power. Back then, there were also factions. There were also succession fights. There were also tensions between political camps. There were also rumors, counter-rumors, and strategic alliances. Now, history appears to be repeating itself again in a different form. What is making this story even more serious is that constitutional changes are not simple matters. Changing constitutional term limits is always sensitive, especially in Africa, because once leaders begin discussing extensions, opposition groups, civil society organizations, war veterans, legal experts, and international observers usually begin paying closer attention. Already, critics of the proposed changes say extending leadership terms could create political instability instead of solving problems. And remember, Zimbabwe has a very politically aware population. Citizens follow politics closely. The opposition follows politics closely. Regional leaders inside SADC follow Zimbabwe closely. Even international investors follow these developments carefully because political uncertainty can affect economic confidence. Now, another thing adding fuel to this situation is the issue of trust inside the ruling party. Because once succession battles begin, trust usually disappears slowly. People stop speaking openly. Meetings become sensitive. Rumors begin leaking. Political camps begin strengthening themselves quietly. Everybody begins calculating the future. And that is exactly what many analysts now believe is happening inside ZANU PF. Some reports even suggest there have already been disagreements inside high-level party meetings concerning the constitutional amendment discussions. And honestly, if those reports are accurate, then it means the tension is deeper than what the public is currently seeing. Because politicians rarely expose internal disagreements openly unless the situation has already become serious behind closed doors. Now, my people, let us also talk about something very important. The ordinary Zimbabwean citizen. Because at the end of the day, political fights affect regular people the most. When politicians fight over power, investors become nervous. Business confidence weakens. Economic decisions slow down. People become uncertain about the future. And Zimbabwe has already experienced years of economic challenges that many citizens are hoping to move beyond. So now imagine adding a major succession struggle on top of those challenges. People naturally become worried, especially young people. Many young Zimbabweans want opportunities. They want stable jobs. They want growth. They want the country to move forward peacefully. But right now, politics is dominating the national conversation again. And social media has made the entire situation even louder. Every speech now becomes viral. Every rumor spreads quickly. Every political appearance gets analyzed online. Even seating arrangements at events are now being discussed politically. That is how tense the atmosphere has become. And once politics reaches that level, it means people know something major may be developing behind the scenes. Now, let us be honest about one thing. Mnangagwa is still a very powerful political figure. He controls state structures. He controls party systems. He has loyal supporters. And many people inside ZANU PF still believe he provides stability and continuity. But on the other side, Chiwenga is also not an ordinary politician. This is a man with liberation struggle, credentials, military influence, and strong recognition inside important sections of the establishment. So what Zimbabwe is witnessing now is not a small disagreement. This is a heavyweight political contest. A contest about the future direction of the ruling party. A contest about succession. A contest about influence. And possibly a contest about survival inside political structures. Now, some analysts believe Mnangagwa's camp may eventually succeed in pushing the constitutional changes because ZANU PF still controls parliament strongly. But others believe resistance inside the party itself may become the biggest obstacle because internal rebellion is usually harder to control than opposition attacks. And remember, history has shown many times that political danger often comes from inside, not outside. That is why people are watching Chiwenga's next moves carefully. Will he continue remaining quiet publicly? Will his supporters begin speaking louder? Will the ruling party remain united? Or will the tension grow deeper as 2028 approaches? Those are the questions now dominating political discussions in Zimbabwe. Another thing making this story emotional for many citizens is that Zimbabweans have seen political uncertainty before. They remember the Mugabe years. They remember the transition period. They remember military involvement in politics. They remember economic hardships. So naturally, whenever political tensions begin rising again, many citizens become nervous about the future. But at the same time, others are fascinated by the drama unfolding because Zimbabwe politics always produces powerful political stories, unexpected alliances, surprise statements, strategic silence, sudden reshuffles, public rallies, internal meetings, powerful speeches, and behind all that, serious calculations about who controls the future. Right now, many observers believe the next 2 years could completely reshape Zimbabwe politics. Because if the 2030 project succeeds, it changes the succession timeline entirely. But if resistance grows stronger, the ruling party could face even more internal pressure. And if divisions become public, the political atmosphere could become even more heated. One thing that has shocked many observers recently is how openly some political figures are now speaking about succession issues. In the past, these discussions were usually hidden carefully behind closed doors. But now, statements are becoming more direct. Warnings are becoming louder. Political camps are becoming easier to identify. And social media discussions are becoming more intense every single week. Now, let us also remember that regional politics matter here. Zimbabwe is not isolated. What happens inside Zimbabwe affects Southern Africa politically and economically. That is why regional leaders are likely monitoring the situation carefully. Nobody wants instability. Nobody wants uncertainty. Everybody wants Zimbabwe to remain peaceful and stable. And ordinary Zimbabweans also want peace. That is the most important thing. Because regardless of political differences, citizens always want national stability first. Now, some supporters of the 2030 agenda argue that extending leadership could help maintain policy continuity and continue national development projects. They believe changing leadership too quickly could interrupt long-term plans. But critics disagree strongly. They argue that respecting constitutional term limits is important for democracy and political stability. So this debate is now becoming bigger than just Mnangagwa and Chiwenga. It is becoming a national constitutional conversation, a governance conversation, a future of Zimbabwe conversation. And honestly, emotions are now deeply involved on all sides. Supporters defend their camps passionately. Critics attack opposing positions strongly. Political commentators analyze every development daily. And citizens continue watching carefully, trying to understand where the country is heading next. One thing is very clear though, Zimbabwe politics is entering another historic period. The succession battle is no longer hidden. The 2030 conversation has changed everything. And from the looks of things, this political drama is far from over. Because every week now brings another statement, another reshuffle, another rumor, another political signal, another tense discussion. And honestly, many people believe the real political battle has only just begun. So my people, as Zimbabwe moves closer toward 2028, all eyes will remain on Mnangagwa, Chiwenga, Sanyatwe, Mutsvangwa, Tagwirei, and the powerful political forces surrounding them. Because what happens next may decide not only the future of ZANU PF, but also the future direction of Zimbabwe itself. And in African politics, once succession battles become this serious, nobody can confidently predict how the story will end. That is why the whole region is watching closely. That is why citizens are discussing politics everywhere. That is why social media is exploding daily.